Welcome and thank you for standing by. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Please hold your questions until the question and answer session. At that time, to ask a question, please press star 1 and record your name. This webinar is being recorded. A recording of the webinar will be available on the EPAC Transportation Regulatory Activities website. That URL will be provided in a slide during the webinar and will be emailed to you afterward. If you have technical difficulties during the webinar, please press star 0 to speak to an operator. I'd now like to turn the call over to your host, Ted Sears. Thank you, and you may begin.
Okay, thank you, Tiffany. Welcome, everyone, to the webinar on the U.S. Department of Energy's final rule on electric drive vehicles and infrastructure that is part and parcel of U.S. DOE's Alternative Fuel Transportation Program, which is also referred to as the EPAC State and Alternative Fuel Provider Fleet Program. Today, we are going to provide an overview of the vehicle and investment credit allocations under the new rule, as well as some of the other program modifications that were set forth in the newly released rule. My name is Ted Sears. I'm with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and I serve as a project leader and provide direct support to Department of Energy for the EPAC State and Alternative Fuel Provider Fleet Program. I'm joined today by Ira Dassa, and Ira and his team at New West Technologies provide direct support also on this program, providing consistent support for the programs, both its regulatory phone and email hotline. So glad to have Ira join me today. We are going to do a little bit of a tag team back and forth a few times, so hopefully we'll not confuse you but keep you in the loop. So the new rule, I think most people probably know, was published March 21st of this year, and it establishes credit allocation levels under the standard compliance method of the Alternative Fuel Transportation Program for the acquisition of certain electric drive vehicles and investments in qualified alternative fuel infrastructure, qualified alternative fuel non-road equipment, and emerging technologies as well. The applicable vehicles include certain hybrid electric vehicles, plug-in electric drive vehicles, fuel cell electric vehicles, and medium or heavy-duty electric vehicles, as well as neighborhood electric vehicles. And the new credit allocations apply to vehicle acquisitions and investments that are made in model year 2014 and future model years. The approach that DOE took in setting forth this rule, or establishing the final rule, essentially increases the number of creditable actions within the program, and as a result expands the range of available compliance options, and therefore is expected to facilitate compliance by regulated entities or covered fleets. So DOE does intend that this rule will be very helpful for fleets. In today's program, or our agenda, is fairly straightforward. We're going to begin with a little bit of regulatory background. We don't want to get too deep into the weeds of the regulations, but we do think it's important to recognize that this is a regulatory program whose provisions track and implement Congress's language set forth in statutes or laws. So we'll provide a bit of background so that we're all on the same page as we proceed through our slides or presentation. And as a result of this being a regulatory program, specifically, there are a couple of points we want to be sure to cover because they really are the linchpin for a few key distinctions that the new rule either sets forth or clarifies, particularly in the context of alternative fuel vehicles, or AFVs. So a portion of our presentation will focus on these distinctions regarding AFVs. We'll then provide an overview of the credit allocations under the new rule as they relate to vehicle acquisitions and investments, and then also provide some information on other program modifications that essentially provide some streamlining to the program, try to facilitate program function, provide clarity to you, the covered fleets, as well as consistency. And then, of course, provide a short summary and contact information as provided on the last slide. We do expect to have plenty of time for questions. I think Tiffany mentioned that this is being recorded, and we also expect to generate a Q&A document if we have sufficient number of questions. So at this point, I will turn it over to Ira to provide a little bit of program and regulatory background.
Thank you, Ted. As I think everybody is aware, the program, or as Ted indicated, sometimes referred to as the State and Alternative Fuel Provider Fleet Program, sometimes referred to as the AFTP. Generally today, you'll hear me just referring to it as the program. The program itself stems from the Energy Policy Act of 1992, or what we sometimes refer to as EPAC 92. This law that Congress passed has a goal of promoting alternative fuel use to the maximum extent practicable, and for state government and alternative fuel provider fleets, it requires certain fleets, those that are covered, that meet the coverage criteria. These fleets are required to, when they acquire new light-duty vehicles every year, a certain percentage have to be light-duty alternative fuel vehicles or light-duty AFVs. At present, the acquisition requirements for covered state government fleets is that 75% of all annual non-excluded light-duty vehicle acquisitions have to be light-duty AFVs, and for alternative fuel provider fleets, the percentage is 90%. So 90% of an AFP or an alternative fuel provider fleet's new light-duty vehicle acquisitions have to be light-duty AFVs. For alternative fuel provider fleets, there is a requirement that stems from the statute that the alternative fuel vehicles that are required must use alternative fuel when the vehicle is operating in an area where the alternative fuel is in fact available. There are, as Ted intimated earlier, there are under the program two compliance methods that exist under the program. The first is what we generally refer to, and what we'll be talking for the most part about today, standard compliance. This is what was in the statute initially, or in EPAC initially, and under this approach, state fleets and alternative fuel provider fleets, when they are covered, you meet your requirement in any given year by either acquiring light-duty AFVs as a result of Congress's action in 2005. Fleets also have the ability to earn up to 50% of their annual AFV acquisition requirements by purchasing and using in the fleet's medium and heavy-duty vehicles biodiesel, B20 or a higher blend. And then the third primary means through which a fleet can achieve compliance under the standard compliance method is, if necessary, applying for and getting exemptions from DOE in the event that a particular alternative fuel vehicle in a particular vehicle type, and if an AFV is not available, or if alternative fuel for a particular AFV is not available. As it's set out on the slide, you see three bullets. The state plan is also a compliance method that's available to state fleets, but it's actually embedded in the standard compliance option, but we've broken it out separately here. A state can submit a plan, and what having a state plan enables you to do is you can then have other fleets be a part of your plan, and therefore the state can take credit or earn credit for the AFV acquisitions that those partner fleets make in any given year. To date, DOE has not had any state that has submitted a plan under this particular aspect of standard compliance. And then the other compliance method that's available to all covered fleets under the program is what we refer to as alternative compliance, or AC. Under alternative compliance, fleets submit an alternative compliance application, the key portion of which is known as a petroleum reduction plan, and that plan sets forth the means by which the fleet will go about reducing its petroleum use in its motor vehicles, and there's a certain petroleum reduction requirement that the fleet has to meet in any given year in order to be compliant with its requirements. And so alternative compliance is a little different from standard compliance in that it really is driven by alternative fuel use as opposed to alternative fuel vehicle acquisition. So let's jump forward now to the rule about which we're speaking today, generally referred to as the 133 final rule, 133 being the provision of the Energy Independence and Security Act of 2007 that directed that DOE issue the rule. Congress included this provision in the 2007 energy law, and as you can see, it directed DOE to allocate AFV credit under the program in an amount to be determined by DOE for, on the one hand, acquisition of certain electric drive vehicles, the vehicles that Ted alluded to earlier, hybrid electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, and several others. Ted will be discussing those momentarily. And then, on the other hand, for fleets that make investments in either qualified alternative fuel infrastructure, qualified alternative fuel non-road equipment, or emerging technologies, which are technologies that relate to any of the electric drive vehicles that we will be discussing today. And so a little preliminary background. Under the program, for a vehicle to be considered an alternative fuel vehicle, it has to be either a dedicated vehicle or a dual-fueled vehicle. A dedicated vehicle under the program is a vehicle that operates solely on one or more alternative fuels. That's actually one minor modification that DOE included in this rulemaking. The definition of a dedicated vehicle has now been revised to make it possible for a particular vehicle to operate on one or more alternative fuels. Previously, it was just on an alternative fuel. And the second avenue for a vehicle to qualify as an AFV is for it to be considered a dual-fueled vehicle. This is a vehicle that is capable of operating on alternative fuel and also on gasoline or diesel, either gasoline or diesel. A key aspect of the dual-fueled vehicle definition with respect to plug-in electric vehicles is that NHTSA has to NHTSA has what we refer to as minimum driving range criteria. And for a dual-fueled electric automobile to be considered a dual-fueled vehicle, it has to be able to complete the EPA city and highway test cycles on electricity alone. And NHTSA, together with EPA, makes that determination, and DOE abides by that determination. So if a particular vehicle is either a dedicated vehicle or a dual-fuel vehicle, then under the program it always has and it will continue to receive one AFV credit, assuming it's an excess or an early acquisition. If it's not one of those, well, then DOE will treat it as an AFV and will count it towards your AFV acquisition requirement in that particular year. Any vehicle that does not meet the definition of either a dedicated vehicle or a dual-fueled vehicle, then it is not considered an AFV under the program. Ted?
Thank you, Ira. The key point there is whether, as Ira noted, is whether or not it's a dedicated vehicle or a dual-fueled vehicle. As Ira mentioned, the types of vehicles that satisfy the state and alternative fuel provider fleet acquisition mandates are, again, going to be determined primarily by the definitions of alternative fuel and alternative fuel vehicle. So in the new rule, DOE has assigned credits to those electric drive vehicles that are identified in the statute in ESA Section 133 that do not already qualify as alternative fuel vehicles, as AFVs. And it's done so based on a yardstick of petroleum displacement. An AFV essentially displaces more petroleum than does a non-AFV, or in the reverse. A non-AFV doesn't have a significant effect on the potential for petroleum replacement as compared to an AFV. So the allocations that DOE has established in the new rule are really intended to ensure consistency with the overall approach of the relevant provisions within EPAC 1992, which focuses on replacement of petroleum fuels through the use of replacement fuels to the maximum extent practicable. As I address the various credit allocations in the next few slides, it's going to be important to understand that if a given vehicle type already qualifies as an AFV, it's already eligible for credit or to be counted towards the fleet's AFV acquisition requirements. If it's not an AFV, then the focus shifts to whether or not the specific vehicle type is among the electric drive vehicles set forth in ESA Section 133. So the first group category classification of vehicles would be hybrid vehicles that are neither dedicated vehicles nor dual-fueled vehicles. In other words, they are not AFVs, and these would be classified as potentially as hybrid vehicles. And under the new rule, DOE is allocating half a AFV credit for these vehicles. We think it may be easiest to have this decision tree, or allocation tree we call it, so I'll try to walk through this a little bit. Tracking what Ira was saying, the first question is the vehicle a dedicated vehicle? That is, does it operate solely on an alternative fuel? Is it a battery electric vehicle? Could it be potentially a flex fuel hybrid electric vehicle, or a CNG hybrid electric vehicle, if one were to exist? Presently, not aware of one. If it's a dedicated vehicle, then if the answer is yes, then it is already an AFV. It already receives 1 credit under the existing program. If it's not a dedicated vehicle, the next question you might want to ask yourself is it a dual-fueled vehicle? And that is, does it meet the NHTSA criteria that Ira spelled out? Again, if the answer is yes, if it's dual-fueled, then it's already an AFV. It already receives 1 credit under the existing program. Some examples of this might be, for example, a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle that meets the NHTSA minimum driving range criteria and thus qualifies as a dual-fueled electric automobile. An example might be the Chevy Volt, for example. Another example might be, I think where it exists right now, a fuel cell electric vehicle that operates solely on alternative fuel or on all fuel and gasoline and diesel as well. So, is it dedicated? Is it dual-fueled? And then if the answer is no to both of those, then the question is, well, is it a hybrid vehicle? And so these are non-AFV hybrid vehicles, such as a non-AFV hybrid electric vehicle. It would be allocated 1/2 of an AFV credit under the new rule. Non-AFV plug-in hybrid electric vehicles also are allocated 1/2 of an AFV credit. Again, this would be a vehicle that lacks a liquid or gaseous alternative fuel capable engine and also does not meet the NHTSA minimum driving range criteria. At this point, the only vehicle that we're aware of that is not a dedicated vehicle and that does not meet the NHTSA criteria and yet is a plug-in hybrid would be the Toyota Prius plug-in for model years 2012, 13, and 14, because it did not complete both test cycles on electricity alone, so it's not an AFV. Hence, that plug-in hybrid electric vehicle will get 1/2 a credit. One other point to note, I know there have been some questions as soon as the rule came out, is so when for what model year would credits be available? All credits under ESA Section 133, including these for the vehicles, apply for model year 2014 and forward. Okay, so that's the hybrid vehicles. The next group or classification would be neighborhood electric vehicles. For a number of reasons that are set forth in the preamble to the rule, DOE is allocating 1/4 of a credit for each neighborhood electric vehicle that is acquired. It should be noted that in essence, well, not in essence, but in fact, studies have shown that neighborhood electric vehicles tend to travel a great fewer number of miles than a conventional fleet vehicle might cover, and actually might be more relevant to provide an NEV and 1/8 of a credit, but DOE has decided to provide 1/4 of a credit to neighborhood electric vehicles. Again, as with the other vehicles I covered to this point, the credit is earned for neighborhood electric vehicles that are acquired for model year 2014 acquisitions and forward. Next group of vehicles would be the medium and heavy-duty electric vehicles. DOE needed to address these acquisitions of medium and heavy-duty vehicles. One thing to remember is that this program is essentially a light-duty vehicle program. The AFV acquisition requirement for a fleet in any given year is based on the number of light-duty vehicles it is acquiring or plans to acquire. And the requirement is achieved or met through the acquisition of light-duty AFVs, as well as some of the other means that Ira mentioned, but principally through the acquisition of light-duty AFVs. But that said, fleets may earn credits that they can bank for future use or for trading by acquiring medium-duty and heavy-duty alternative fuel vehicles, and now with the promulgation of this new rule, other non-AFV medium-duty and heavy-duty vehicles. So there are, of course, a couple of different kinds of medium and heavy-duty vehicles that could fall into this category. A plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, or PHEV, hybrid electric medium or heavy-duty vehicle, as well as a battery electric medium and heavy-duty vehicle. These are considered AFVs, and they are already entitled to a credit under the program. The reason for this is that NHTSA, to which, as Ira alluded, to which DOE looks to for vehicle classification determinations, considers that medium-duty and heavy-duty PHEVs are dual-fuel vehicles. And so for the purpose of consistency, DOE is following NHTSA's declaration on PHEV and battery electric medium-duty and heavy-duty vehicles. And NHTSA also treats medium-duty and heavy-duty vehicles that operate on gasoline and E85 to be dual-fuel vehicles. I'm just noting that. So you may recall from a little earlier in this presentation that the question you might ask yourself, considered in the context of light-duty vehicles, if you determine that the vehicle is not a dedicated vehicle as well as a dual-fuel. Well, the NHTSA minimum driving range requirement does not apply to medium or heavy-duty vehicles, and so it would not be possible for other types of hybrid medium-duty or heavy-duty vehicles to be considered dual-fuel and hence an AFV. So only those that are specifically set forth there, the battery electric vehicles and the PHEVs, are AFVs, and all the other hybrids are non-AFVs and would be, as a hybrid, allocated 1/2 of a credit. One caveat to note, you may hopefully are aware that it does apply to credits for these medium-duty and heavy-duty vehicle acquisitions. As has been the case in the program to this point, a credit is only earned after the fleet meets its light-duty AFV acquisition requirements. So regardless of whether that's met through light-duty vehicle acquisitions or biodiesel purchase for use or exemptions or credit trades, that doesn't matter. That being the light-duty vehicle AFV acquisition requirement, simply must be met before any credits based on medium-duty or heavy-duty vehicle acquisitions can be earned in banks. Okay, so that's the allocation under the rule for vehicles. The next category of credits that are allocated under the rule is related to investments. And there are three groupings. The first is related to alternative fuel infrastructure. Covered fleets may earn AFV credits for investments in alternative fuel infrastructure. And this would include alternative fuel refueling stations. It would include charging or battery exchange stations, including neighborhood electric vehicle charging stations. One thing that's important to note is that your typical or your average 120-volt electrical outlet, your basic wall outlet, is excluded from the alternative fuel infrastructure for which you can earn credit. But so how are credits earned or allocated for this classification, alternative fuel infrastructure? Well, a fleet that invests $25,000 or more would be entitled to earn AFV credits. There is a maximum or cap on credits in each model year. The highest cap is a 10-credit maximum for publicly accessible stations with $25,000 invested per credit. So that would be for an expenditure up to $250,000. The emphasis here and the larger cap here is based on serving DOE's desire to serve as much of the general population as possible to be congruent with the program's overarching goals. So there's a 10-credit maximum for publicly accessible stations. There's a 5-credit maximum for private stations with $25,000 earned per credit. So for an expenditure or investment up to $125,000, you can earn as many as 5 credits. If, of course, you went over $125,000, you're still capped at that 5-credit maximum. And there is an overall 10-credit annual maximum. So that would be 1 publicly accessible station or 2 private stations. Four things I'd like to note. Fleets may seek credit for investments that they make in infrastructure that is owned or operated by another fleet or entity, but not for infrastructure that is theirs that another entity paid for. So The fleet has to have paid for it, but it doesn't matter who owns that infrastructure. The second point is that the investment can be for new infrastructure or for an expansion of existing infrastructure. The third point is that a fleet should be seeking credit in the model year that the infrastructure is actually put into operation. So if you started building the infrastructure in this model year but did not put it into operation until model year 2015, then you would seek credit in 2015. And then the last point there is that fleets can earn credit for investments in model year 2014 and forward. You should note also that when a fleet is filing its annual report, you would have to provide information on fuel type for the infrastructure, the location of the infrastructure, the date that was initially put into operation, as well as you might imagine, the amount of money that was spent. Okay, so that's alternative fuel infrastructure category. The next category for which fleets can earn credit is the alternative fuel non-road equipment category. So this includes mobile non-road equipment. This would be self-propelled equipment, for example, a forklift or a mobile farm or landscaping or construction equipment, a riding lawnmower, but would not include, for example, a walk-behind mower or a generator that is mobile only to the extent that it is moved around on a trailer. So this would have to be mobile equipment. Also important to note is that the non-road equipment must operate on alternative fuel. As with the infrastructure category, credits are earned or allocated with one AFE credit for every $25,000 that the covered fleet invests, with maximums or caps as before. Specifically, there's a 5-credit maximum per model year, and this equates to an expenditure or investment of $125,000. There are 4 points with this category I'd also like to note. The investments need to happen or need to be made by the requesting fleet, and only for the fleet's own acquisitions, so not for any acquisitions for other fleets. It has to be for the fleet's own use. A fleet should seek credit in the model year that equipment is put into operation. As with the other categories, credits may be earned in model year 2014 and thereafter. And then also there's, as with the other categories, certain information will need to be provided with the annual report regarding, as you might imagine, the amount of money invested, the model year that the equipment was put into operation, what was acquired, and then also a certification that it's being operated on alternative fuel. And then the last investment category is the emerging technology category. This would be for pre-production or pre-commercial versions of the ESA Section 133 electric drive vehicles, the vehicles that we've been talking about. So how are credits allocated or earned for this category? Now, here's a little bit different, and the difference is simply driven by the way Congress drafted the statutory language. A fleet, again, earns credits based on the amount of money invested or spent. A fleet earns 2 AFE credits for the first $50,000 invested, so there's no initial $25,000 for which a credit can be earned. Once you spend 50, you get 2 credits, or you earn 2 credits. And then each of the next 25,000 increments also achieves an additional 1 AFE credit. There is a maximum or cap, as with the other categories, of 5 credits per model year, which of course equates to an expenditure of $125,000, they being $25,000 increments. And for this category of investments or credits, a fleet may find itself assessing or weighing its options as to what's the best approach. For example, and bear with me not to lose people by throwing some numbers in here, but for example, if a covered fleet spent, say, $500,000 for 10 pre-production electric drive alternative fuel vehicles, and assuming that each one was $50,000 per vehicle, the options might include, in the annual report, claiming 10 credits for the 10 vehicles. In other words, 10 alternative fuel vehicles and 10 credits. So not taking credit for the investment, but rather for the vehicles acquired. Or it might be a better approach for the fleet to actually take 5 credits for investing in 3 of the vehicles. So each vehicle being $50,000, a total of $150,000 spent on these vehicles. and 5 credits earned for those 3, and then earning an additional 7 credits for the remaining alternative fuel vehicles as vehicle acquisitions. And there the total is 12 versus 10 with the first approach. So the key point here is that there may be more than one way to view the investment in vehicle acquisitions. But it's equally important to note that no double counting is allowed. So the qualifying pre-production vehicles for which investment credit is sought can't also be counted as AFV acquisitions or allocated AFV credit. It's either one or the other. 4 points, as with the other categories, I have 4 points, that the fleet should see credit in the model year that the emerging technology is put into operation. Second, as with the other categories, the fleet earns credits for its investments in model year 2014 and forward. Third, the requesting fleet must be the one that made the investment. And fourth, the fleet is going to need to provide detailed information, as with the other categories, so that DOE would be able to verify the purposes of the investment and the number of credits that the investment qualified for, as well as when the technology was put into operation. Okay, so those are the credit investment credit categories and how the credits are earned. There are a few general concepts regarding credit allocations that I'd like to address. As you may have noted with the investment categories, there are no fractional credits that are earned. They're all in whole number credits. But fleets may aggregate the monetary sums that are invested in a particular model year to reach an applicable investment credit threshold. So the amount of money invested in alternative fuel infrastructure, alternative fuel non-road equipment, and emerging technology can be aggregated such that the funds from multiple categories can be used to achieve the applicable threshold for the purpose of earning an AFV credit. So, for example, if a fleet invested $10,000 in a private alternative fuel station and $15,000 in non-road equipment, those are obviously coming from 2 different categories. Neither category achieved the $25,000 level, but you could aggregate these to $25,000 to earn that 1 AFV credit. The only caveat to this is that you're not being allowed to aggregate from a category for which your fleet has already been allocated the maximum number of credits for that category. So, for example, if you already earn the maximum number of credits of 5 for a non-road equipment category, because perhaps you spent $135,000, so you earned 5 credits, you can't take that extra $10,000, that is the $135,000 minus $125,000. You can't take that extra bit and aggregate it with money from one of the other categories, because you've already earned the maximum number from that non-road equipment category. So one small caveat there. A second general concept to note regarding multi-year investments. So while the credit may only be sought for the model year in which your infrastructure or your non-road vehicle or emerging technology began operating, investments, we know, can obviously span more than one model year. So if your fleet, say, spent $12,500 in one model year and then an additional $12,500 in the following model year, you would be entitled to 1 investment credit for the $25,000 total that you invested in that second model year, assuming that is the year in which the infrastructure began operating. There's a key here, and that is that you see credit in the model year that the all-fuel infrastructure or all-fuel non-road equipment or emerging technology is put into operation. So you wouldn't seek that credit in the first year, and you also would not seek credit for prior year investments, but rather the year in which it was put into operation. And then the third general concept that I want to touch on is rounding, which actually applies not just to investments but to all of the credits. As certainly you note, the approach that DOE has set forth in the rule allocates less than 1 credit for acquisition of certain vehicle types and whole number values for investments or for investments. So when you're filing your annual report, fleets have to, of course, total the credits that are earned, including all the fractions, and then round. And so you round to the nearest whole number. So as you might imagine, fractions that are greater than or equal to 0.5 or 1/2 should be rounded up, and fractions less than 0.5 would be rounded down. And this approach is consistent with how fleets round for purposes of calculating AFE acquisition requirements. And that covers the general concepts. So Ira is up next, I think.
Thank you, Ted. So there, as Ted had indicated at the outset of the presentation, there are a number of other program modifications that DOE has included in the 133 final rule. Over the next couple of slides, I will describe those for you. The first general program modification that DOE made pertains to credit activity reporting and what we'll refer to as a credit activity report, the acronym you see on the slide here, CAR. For fleets to get credit for any of their 133 vehicle acquisitions or for any of their 133 investments, the three categories that Ted just mentioned, you're going to have to provide certain information to DOE so that DOE can verify and allocate, et cetera, and all of this information is to be provided via the credit activity report. This is not to be a new requirement that DOE is establishing. Rather, what DOE has done, the credit activity report is now incorporated into, it's become a part of the annual report that you're all very familiar with and accustomed to filling out on an annual basis. And so certainly for fleets that file their annual reports online, you shouldn't see any real change. The information will come to DOE in the same manner, and all the information that you need to provide in order to get credit for your electric drive vehicle acquisitions or your investments will get to DOE. It will just be delineated a little differently, either your credit activity report or otherwise. And for those fleets that still use the annual report form, the spreadsheet that is on the DOE website, this too has been modified accordingly so that it clearly states that the credit activity report is now part of the annual report, and all of the necessary information is set forth there, and you will fill in your blanks, and all of the information that DOE needs will get to DOE. I should note we intend to hold at least one, maybe more than one webinar over the near term. Perhaps next month remains to be, the date has yet to be determined, but we will let everybody know when we will be holding webinars to give you some more information about the updated annual reporting compliance tool and the updated forms. Of course, as I think everybody is aware, annual reports, the annual reporting period doesn't start until the current model year ends, which will not happen until August 31st. But we do intend to, DOE does intend to hold at least one or more webinars to discuss the new form, or I should say the updated form, and the credit activity portion of it, which is directly related to the 133 final rule. The second program modification that we'll discuss here has to do with the exemption process under standard compliance, and in particular the timing that's associated with the exemption process. DOE has codified in the regulations language that brings the regulatory provisions in line with what's been existing practice under the program for some time now, and that is that you are expected to submit your exemption request after, not prior to, the submission of your fleet's annual report for any given model year. And corresponding with that, that would mean that exemption requests are to be submitted no sooner than September 1 in any model year and no later than January 31 following the close of that model year. And so this would mean if a fleet files its annual report in a timely manner, let's just assume for argument's sake that the annual report is filed on the December 31 deadline, then that particular fleet would have a full month to complete its exemption request, and DOE believes that this is more than sufficient time for the fleet to complete the exemption request and submit it. DOE has also added language to the regulations to make it clear that if DOE is in need of additional information upon receipt of a fleet's exemption request, then the fleet has to respond to DOE's request for additional information within a 30-day time frame. And for any fleet that, for whatever reason, does not respond to that request for additional data in a timely manner, then DOE will go ahead and process the exemption request as received. But fleets should take note that this may mean that DOE doesn't have the information it needs to enable it to grant an an exemption request in full. So it behooves fleets to comply with this time frame and respond to DOE in a suitable manner such that DOE has all the information it needs to process the exemption request. And then finally, language has been added to the regulatory provisions both in the state fleet subpart and the alternative fuel provider fleet subpart of the Part 490 regulations, explaining that if a fleet's annual report shows that it has an acquisition deficiency for the model year, then DOE asks that the fleet indicate in its report if it intends to submit an exemption request. This just gives DOE some advance notice as to whether an exemption is forthcoming or not. One other key aspect or modification is really not a modification, but certainly worthy of note today. So as Ted pointed out earlier, non-AFE hybrid electric vehicles like the Ford Focus, actually not the Focus, the Ford Fusion hybrid or the Toyota Prius hybrid that's been out on the road for some years now. Those vehicles are not AFVs, but they will be getting half credit for fleets that acquire them in model year 2014 and thereafter. DOE is now going to be taking a position similar to the position it has taken with respect to biodiesel for some time now, and that is non-AFV hybrids are widely available across the country, and the fuel for them, gasoline, also is available everywhere. So in a fleet's exemption request, DOE is going to expect the fleet to now indicate in its exemption whether it met at least 50% of its annual acquisition requirements through the acquisition of such non-AFV hybrid vehicles. And if the fleet did not, then the fleet is expected to demonstrate to DOE that either non-AFV hybrids were not available in the vehicle type that the fleet needs, and only if that demonstration is made will the fleet be able to get potentially the full number of exemptions it's seeking. If the fleet doesn't make that showing, doesn't make that demonstration, then as DOE has done for some time now with biodiesel, DOE will limit the number of exemptions that are granted based on the shortfall of non-hybrid AFV, non-AFV hybrid acquisitions by that fleet in that model year. And then finally, DOE made a number of program modifications to the alternative compliance provisions in the Part 490 regulations. In particular, DOE eliminated prior to the 133 final rule, there were two application deadlines, and DOE has now made it more consistent throughout. There is a single application deadline that now applies for every fleet that is interested in the alternative compliance option, and that deadline will now be July 31st, which for all intents and purposes is the deadline that virtually every fleet, if not all fleets, that have ever submitted an application under alternative compliance have ever abided by. But it's now in the regulations that this is the only deadline. You have to have your application in by July 31st. Importantly, the deadline for submitting your intent to apply for alternative compliance is unchanged. That remains March 31 prior to the model year in question. DOE has also clarified a number of the regulatory provisions in the AC regulations that govern the rollover of excess petroleum reductions or the use of previously rolled over excess reductions in a particular model year. And then finally, DOE has added a regulatory provision to make it clear that if a fleet's alternative compliance waiver is revoked by DOE and the fleet is then returned to standard compliance for that particular model year, then exemptions are not available to that fleet for that model year. Ted, you want to summarize now?
Bring it back together here. So thanks, Ira. Hopefully from these prior 19 or 20 prior slides, you've seen that the final rule is, in fact, increases the number of creditable actions under the program, and as a result expands the range of available compliance options for covered fleets. And then this expanded flexibility is expected to facilitate compliance for covered fleets under this regulatory program. I think the summary is fairly straightforward. You know, we have this regulatory program that focuses on light-duty vehicles, and as Ira pointed out, alternative fuel vehicles have earned 1 credit, and they will continue to earn 1 credit, but that there are some vehicles that are not AFVs but addressed in the ESA Section 133 provision, and so DOE is allocating credit to those vehicles that are non-AFVs, that are hybrid electric vehicles. They earn a half a credit. Medium duty and heavy duty vehicles that are hybrids that are not AFVs earn half a credit as well, and neighborhood electric vehicles earn a quarter credit. In addition, today we've reviewed the 3 investment categories for which fleets may earn credits, and the monetary thresholds with the maximums for each model year. And we talked a little bit about the three components or aspects of credits in terms of aggregation for the investment expenditures, multi-year investments, and then of course the rounding of fractional credits as well. And Iris went through some of the more important program modifications that are not associated with the vehicles or credit investment credits. And also Ira noted, importantly, the webinars. Expect to have at least 2, I think, and the first one would probably be in the May timeframe, that will provide fleet POCs, points of contact, a good background on the updated annual reporting compliance tool, which is also, as he noted, been revised and is intended to facilitate the whole compliance process and just really streamline things, make things easy for you. And along that, I just do also want to note that we do have a very strong regulatory hotline, both through the phone and email systems. And so I would encourage you with questions both about this rule but also going forward to make use of that. Compliance outreach is a very important part of the EPAC State and Fuel Provider Fleet Program, and we just want to make sure that you know that we're here for you if you have questions, and provide compliance assistance as we can. This second to last slide has just set forth some of the credit allocations that we've talked about, where you see HEV, PHEV, fuel cell electric vehicle, and NEVs, and the medium and heavy duty. Of course, these are for non-AFV vehicles. And then also you see the alternative fuel infrastructure, alternative fuel non-road equipment, and emerging technology. The credit allotments are set forth there, and any pertinent limitations are set forth in the right-hand column, all things that we've covered. And of course, this will be available both online, and I think we may be able to provide it by email to fleet POCs as well. And then the last slide is just simply a link to one of the pages of our program website. There's a lot of good information on our program website, guidance documents, and information, explanations, frequently asked questions, a number of fact sheets, and more, plenty more, that you can access by going through this link or more directly through the program homepage. And of course, Dana O'Hara is the U.S. Department of Energy contact for the regulatory program, and then there's my contact information and Ira's as well. So certainly feel free to reach out to us. And I think given that, I will leave it on this slide, and then I think if Tiffany's there, we can open it up to questions.
Thank you. We will now begin the question and answer session. If you would like to ask a question, please press star 1 on your touch-tone phone. Please unmute your phone and record your name clearly when prompted. Your name is required to introduce your question. To withdraw your question, you may press star 2. Once again, if you would like to ask a question, you may press star 1 at this time. One moment for the first question.
Thank you, Tiffany.
First question comes from Genevieve Cohen. Your line is open.
Oh, hi. First of all, thanks for holding this. It's been really useful to just get a walkthrough of this sometimes quite dense rule. So I appreciate it. My question, and forgive me if this is too specific, but in the emerging technology section, the metric is pre-commercial or pre-production, and I wonder, and at some points in discussion, it talks about not widely available. I just wondered if there were more specific metrics of what would fall within emerging technology. I'm thinking, obviously, if something is offered for sale, then it's, commercially available, by some definitions. Or if some cars are just offered in California, but, they're widely available in California, but not in, say, Nebraska. Maybe I'm overthinking, but I just wondered if there were some details or maybe forthcoming details on what the metrics of emerging was.
Right. So very good question. There will be some information forthcoming on this, because this is sort of, as you correctly identified, it's an area where there could be some gray areas, or at least questions as to, as you point out, for example, in California there may be some vehicles available, not elsewhere. So it's not something that we've addressed to this point. So I know that's not a helpful answer at this particular moment.
No, actually, it's helpful to know that that nobody knows yet.
Yeah, right. But certainly, if it's something that is, again, there's no specific answer yet. But if it's something that is widely available or is available for sale, generally, then one would imagine that would be considered not pre-production.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Sure.
The next question comes from Leonard Lincoln. Your line is open.
Okay, yes. I was not able to pull this up on the video. I was able to listen in. I didn't catch the website that I could go to actually review this later.
I believe we're going to be sending it via email. So if you have logged in, we will be able to send it to you. I think it may be easier than just the URL, which is a long string.
Okay.
The web address. But I've made a note here, so I'll make sure that is sent out.
The next question comes from Eisen Barris. Your line is open.
I'm assuming maybe that's Eisenbarth, so that would be me. This is Elsie Eisenbarth. I have a question. If I understand, this appears to be model year 2014 and forward. What consideration is being given to companies that have already made a sizable investment in electric vehicles, alternative fuel vehicles, in years prior to 2014?
Well, the way that the DOE has directed things, under the Administrative Procedures Act, rules may only have sort of future effect, and that goes along with the fact that determining whether or not a fleet has met its requirements in any given year is done in that particular model year. So, for example, one couldn't apply credits if there were even some sort of clause that would allow that. Couldn't apply credits earned previously to come into compliance. But the bottom line is that credits may be earned for acquisitions made in 2014 and forward. So if you had acquired vehicles in model any applicable hybrids for which you could earn half a credit, if you had acquired them in model year 2013 or previously, then you would not, credit would not be available for those.
So what if that fleet was already 98% alternative fuel? How would they meet the requirement to go forward, because there really wouldn't be the capacity to add? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, well, the way it works is essentially your requirement to acquire alternative fuel vehicles or credits towards compliance is driven by the number of vehicles that you are acquiring in a given year, given model year. So, for example, if in this coming model year you were not acquiring any new light-duty vehicles, you have no requirement, because it's driven by the number of vehicles.
Okay, and is it a percentage?
Yes, it's a percentage. So I think one of the first slides noted that if you're a state fleet, then it's 75% of your acquisitions would need to be, of your light-duty acquisitions would need to be alternative fuel vehicles. So, for example, if you were planning to acquire 20 light-duty vehicles in that given model year, then 15 or 75% would need to be alternative fuel vehicles. If you're a utility or, alternative fuel provider fleet, like a utility, then that requirement is 90%, and your requirement would be 18 of the 20. But if you don't buy any, or you're not planning to buy any, you don't buy any light-duty vehicles, then you have no requirement.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Next question comes from Kara Kelly.
Hi, this is Tara Kelly. I have two questions. One is a clarification on earning credits for investments in infrastructure or non-road equipment. You can earn those credits at any time. In other words, you don't need to meet your light-duty vehicle acquisition requirements before getting those credits, correct?
That's correct.
And then my second question is, you made mention too, when you claim vehicles under this program, you need to utilize the appropriate alternative fuel in those vehicles when the fuel is available. And my question centers around, let's just pick E85, for example. You have flex fuel vehicles in your fleet. We may have E85 available at several public refueling stations within our service territory. However, our fleet is prohibited from refueling at public stations because we have our own fuel stations specifically for municipal and utility operations. And so is that an adequate reasoning for why perhaps we have one E85 tank and it's not centrally located to all of our fleet? So there are some E85 flex fuel vehicles that cannot refuel with E85. Is that acceptable, even though E85 might be available at a public station nearby?
Ira, does this fall into your bailiwick?
It could. I'd be happy to handle it, Ted. Can I ask, Kara, you're referring to, in your case, you would be a state government fleet, correct?
An alternative fuel provider.
Okay. All right. Well, I was just gonna highlight again that state government fleets this stems from the statutory language that Congress adopted in EPAC 92. Alternative fuel provider fleets, yes, are required to use alternative fuel in their AFVs when those vehicles are operating in an area where the fuel is available. That is not the case for state government fleets. So in your case, if you're referring to an alternative fuel provider fleet, the situation you're describing is, for lack of a better term, I'll describe it as it's a little funky, I suppose. So you're saying you've got public stations available, but your fleet is prohibited from accessing those public stations.
Correct. They are forced to refuel at one of our own refueling stations, which not everyone has an E85 tank at it.
Sure. What I would suggest to you, Kara, is why don't you pose that question to us via the regulatory information hotline and describe the circumstances as best you can. I'm saying that only because this is not your question is not something that grows out of the 133 final rule. This would be more of this is specific to an exemption request and not having to do with any of the provisions that DOE has just promulgated in the final rule. So if you wouldn't mind, pose the question or put the question into an email, or if you want to call us on the Regulatory Information Hotline, and then we'll get back to you after some discussion, I would imagine.
Thank you.
Okay.
Next question comes from Nida Como.
Magda Kumo. I'm calling from Rutgers University in New Jersey. My question is, how will we know if the hybrid meets the NHTSA criteria?
Okay, so what the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration is, or NHTSA, has a website for which we will provide the link that's available, and you'll be able to see what vehicles are posted. But better yet, the labels that are posted on the vehicles will state that the vehicle is a dual-fueled vehicle or it's not a dual-fueled vehicle. And of course, as Ira was pointing out early on in the presentation, if it's a dedicated vehicle or a dual-fueled vehicle, then it is an alternative fuel vehicle. If it does not say dual-fueled on there, then it would not be considered an AFV.
Ted, can I interject something as well?
Absolutely.
And Magda, it's really your question. You were inquiring about hybrids, and there's sort of a dividing line here. If you're talking about a traditional hybrid electric vehicle or an HEV, something like the standard Toyota Prius or the Ford Fusion or any other hybrid electric that's out there, that's in a different category as opposed to plug-in hybrid electrics. The plug-in hybrid electrics is really where DOE has to look to NHTSA and EPA to ascertain whether the vehicle completed the test cycles. For a traditional hybrid electric, and the ones that are out there on the road today are vehicles that, while they have an electric motor, they do not run on anything other than gasoline. And so all hybrid electric vehicles of the traditional variety, again, like the Prius, like the Ford Fusion, those vehicles are not AFVs. The only way they could become AFVs in the future is if they happen to be equipped with an engine that runs on something other than or in addition to gasoline. So if there was an HEV out there that could run on E85 as well as gasoline, then it would be a dual-fueled vehicle. Or if you had a hybrid, I think Ted alluded to this at the outset, if there were a hybrid out there, there isn't one today, but if there were a hybrid that were equipped with an engine that could run on CNG, then again, it would be that might actually be a dual-fueled, or it might be a dedicated, depending upon how the vehicle is equipped. But it's only for the plug-in hybrid electrics where DOE has to look to whether the vehicle met the NHTSA test minimum range criteria.
Okay, then I think I'm still falling short. So the hybrid electric vehicles that are receiving 1/2 credit, do we need to check to see if those are meeting the criteria of NHTSA, or are we automatically to assume that the hybrid electrics that are, that qualify for the 1/2 credit, they automatically will receive the 1/2 credit?
Again, you're not talking about a plug-in hybrid, then there are no criteria you have to look to. You can assume that you would qualify.
How about the Leaf?
Well, the Leaf is not. The Leaf would be considered a battery electric vehicle. That one is an AFV.
So that gets
yes.
the full credit.
Right. When I'm saying a hybrid, I'm talking about the traditional hybrids that are out there. There's no plug-in capability. It doesn't plug into a charging station or a wall socket. The only fuel is the gasoline that you put in the engine.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Sure.
The next question comes from Steve Rosenstock.
Hello. I was wondering, could you go back to the previous slide 21 real quick? That's not my question, but okay, thank you very much.
Question, I like that question.
Well, I'm going to ask for another 1 or 2 questions here anyway. In terms of the the infrastructure and some of the for the last three categories about the amount invested. I was wondering about if an entity was using some sort of amortization schedule, whether lease purchase or some sort of loan or some sort of capital investment where they're amortizing. They're putting the equipment in year one. Let's say the $50,000. They're putting it in year one, but they're actually paying for it over a series of, let's say, 3 or 5 or 10 years. Would they still be able to count the $50,000 in year one?
I would say this is a question of first impression. So we would need to take a closer look, but it's a good question. I think the initial reaction would be that since we're looking at, you would claim it in the year in which it's put into operation, that would really be the driving factor. And so, because in other words, you couldn't claim it in a later year after all the money's been invested. So I think you would have, I believe the DOE would have to give you credit for that money that's noted up front. But again, this is a question of first impression, so we would have to look at that.
Yeah, the reason I ask is I'm sure that some people will try to do, they typically, it's a capital investment, so it probably would be amortized. So when you say, $25,000, what does that mean? Is that the year of commitment or the year of the, let's say the final payments? I just figured but that might be help to get that clarification.
Okay, so duly noted.
I have other questions, but I'll just stop there because I'm sure other people have questions. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
Next question comes from Ms. Cosby.
Yes, hi. This is Sarah Cosby at Dominion. Can you hear me?
Sure can.
Okay, great. So I had a question about the plug-in hybrid electric vehicle versus the all-electric vehicles, and you noted that the Toyota Prius plug-in, for example, is not considered an AFV, but I'm thinking that the Chevy Volt and the Nissan Leaf would not be either because they don't meet that 200-mile when operating on the alternative fuel. I'm wondering what's special about the Toyota Prius plug-in, or would all of those vehicles that can't meet the 200-mile threshold operating on the alternative fuel, would all of those be considered dual fuel and thus be given half credit?
Ira?
Sure, Ted. The answer is, well, the Leaf, the Volt, let me assure you, they are in fact AFVs, and the reason for that is the 200-mile range requirement that you're referring to, that actually applies to liquid and gaseous alternative fuels. It does not apply in the case of electric automobiles or dual-fueled electric automobiles, as NHTSA refers to them.
Okay.
For a dual-fueled electric, as NHTSA has always said, the dual-fueled electric vehicle, for it to be considered as such, has to be able to run the EPA highway and city test cycles on electricity alone, albeit recharging is allowed in between each test. So you can run one test cycle, you can recharge, and then you run the other test cycle. If you completed both test cycles on the electricity alone, then you are a dual-fueled electric automobile for NHTSA and CAFE purposes. EPA conducts the test, NHTSA makes the determination. So therein lies the difference. There is not a 200-mile requirement for some electric vehicles and a lower range requirement for others. It's the same for all of them, and it's the EPA city and highway test cycles.
I see. So you can have multiple charging events provided you can meet that 200 miles with those multiple charging events.
No, let me clarify still further. So throw out the 200 miles. It doesn't apply in the case of plug-in electric vehicles at all. That requirement is only applicable to liquid or gaseous alternative fuels. So an E85 vehicle or a CNG vehicle or a propane vehicle, but or any other liquid or gaseous alternative fuel. But for plug-in vehicles, we're not talking about plug-ins that are dedicated vehicles. You're not talking about the Nissan Leaf. You're not talking about the Ford Focus. that any other battery electric vehicle where electricity is the sole fuel. It's only for the plug-in hybrids, and then that's where the minimum range requirement comes in.
And again, that 200 miles is only required for gaseous, not for electric.
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
That is right.
So what was special about the Toyota Prius plug-in? Because I assume that could operate also, I mean, just like the Leaf or the Volt.
Well, it is similar to it's different from the Leaf. It's gasoline fueled as well as having an electric motor. It's similar to the Volt. Both it and the Volt are what we call plug-in hybrid electrics, but the difference is the battery size. And all that matters for DOE purposes under the 133 final rule is the Prius plug-in did not complete the EPA city and highway test cycles on electricity alone, and for that reason, it doesn't qualify as an AFV. It will get a half credit, but it does not qualify for a full credit under the program.
Okay, and I had one other question, and that is, I know under the definition of alternative fuel providers, it's included, I guess, any provider that owns, operates, leases, or otherwise controls 50 or more non-excluded light-duty vehicles, at least 20 of which are capable of being centrally fueled and are primarily used in metropolitan statistical areas or consolidated MSAs with a 1980 census population of 250,000 or more. So my question related to that is, does this mean that any fleet, regardless of whether it serves a state government or not, it could just be any private fleet that meets those criteria is considered an SFP or an alternative fuel provider? Or do they have to be serving a state government entity?
Ted, you want to handle that, or would you like to?
Sure. So the program is focused on state agencies, state agency fleets. They could be state college or state university, Department of Transportation, something like that, or alternative fuel provider fleets, which are typically, for the most part, utilities we tend to think of. DOE, in a prior rulemaking, had looked at private and local fleets and had made a determination that they would not be subject to this program. And so the program is only focused on state agency fleets and the alternative fuel provider fleets.
When you say utility, do you mean like municipal utilities and cooperatives, or do you also mean investor-owned utilities that are shareholder-owned and regulated but don't necessarily only serve a municipality?
It would include those that you mentioned. Municipalities and cooperatives could also be included.
But it would not include investor-owned utilities?
No, it would include investor-owned utilities.
It would?
Yes.
So an investor-owned utility fleet would fall under this final rule?
Yes, assuming that it meets the threshold requirements that you noted, like the 50 light-duty vehicles.
Right. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be an IOU that serves a state government?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Next question comes from Bob. Line is open.
Hello?
Yes, go ahead. Thanks.
Is there going to be any fuel credit issued for alternative energy on the mounted equipment, like the GEMS products on Altet?
I'm sorry, could you just clarify? Like a GEM? Is that what you said?
GEMS, like a GEMS unit.
If you're referring to the GEM vehicle.
No, I was talking about a alternative energy used for mounted equipment, like on a medium-duty truck.
Oh, mounted equipment. No. So, for example, if you had like a bucket truck?
Yes.
Right. So there's no credit for the hybrid component of a bucket truck that's not related to the propulsion of the vehicle.
Okay. How about the Eaton product that's in the medium duty?
Well, that would be if it's just related to operating a bucket or ancillary equipment, then the answer would be no. I would just point out that covered fleets could earn credit towards compliance if they were operating under alternative compliance for the fuel savings that equipment generates. But under standard compliance, there would be no AFV acquisition credit for those vehicles.
So we'd have to generate the fuel savings otherwise to get that credit?
Right. So in terms of fuel savings, the program has two compliance options, essentially, standard compliance and alternative compliance. Fuel savings are addressed through alternative compliance. The new rule addresses compliance under standard compliance, which is really based on vehicle acquisitions.
Thank you.
Once again, to ask a question, please press star 1. The next question comes from Bill Eisen. Your line is open.
Hello. My question regards some clarification on the alternative fuel non-road equipment. Does one credit per $25,000 invested, is that investment in infrastructure or in the purchase of non-road equipment?
That would be for the purchase of non-road equipment, as opposed to, I guess you're referring, when you said infrastructure, perhaps you're meaning alternative fuel, like refueling infrastructure?
Correct.
So that would fall under there are three categories for which one can earn credit for their investments. One is alternative fuel infrastructure. A second would be the alternative fuel non-road equipment, and the third would be pre-production or pre-commercial emerging technology. So it sounds like you were offering investments in two different categories. That would be the non-road equipment and then also alternative fuel infrastructure.
So, for example, is purchase of electric-powered forklifts, would that qualify for credits?
Yep, those are non-road equipment, and they're mobile equipment.
How about propane-powered?
Same.
Thank you.
There are no further questions at this time.
Okay. Well, why don't we give people another minute and see if there's another question or two, and then
if you'd like to ask a question, press star 1.
Ted, while people are gathering their thoughts to ascertain whether they have any final questions, I thought it might be worthwhile just to point out to everyone, or just to reiterate what Ted had said earlier. If you have any questions about particular vehicles, don't hesitate. Send us an email to the regulatory information hotline, or call us on the phone, and we would be happy to entertain that question and get back to you with a firm answer, whether it's specific to a particular plug-in hybrid or any other vehicle, and you're uncertain as to whether it's an AFV or not. We would be happy to get back to you with an answer. You just have to send us an email or get to us on the information line, and we'll be able to get back to you.
All right. Thanks, Ira. Okay. Well, if there are no further questions, then I'd like to say thank you to everyone for taking the time to listen in. And this will be archived, I know. So if you want to come back and hear it again, or certainly reach out as Ira suggested. But thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ira.
This concludes today's conference. All parties may disconnect at this time.